with Tim Stearns.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Kamala Harris offering a closing appeal to voters in Michigan and Pennsylvania on the matter of war in Gaza, Middle East. Except the emphasis is quite different in her spot in Michigan versus in her spot in Pennsylvania. See if you can pick up the difference and ascertain what she thinks she's doing.
Tonight, mixed messages. A K-file investigation this hour finds Kamala Harris is targeting crucial battleground voters with vastly different messages on Gaza and Israel. This ad is running in Michigan, which has the largest Arab population in America.
What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
All right, well, it's a very different story for an ad in Pennsylvania targeting Jewish voters.
Let me be clear. I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7.
The amount of willful naivete it would take to, if you're a Muslim in Hamtramck or you're a Jewish person in suburban Pennsylvania, to believe Kamala Harris is off the charts. Either way, which is why it's not working. In point of fact, there was some interesting survey data that shows the Muslim vote nationally. Kamala is tied with Jill Stein.
Oh, wow.
Michigan at 41%. And so every vote for Jill Stein is a vote of a Democrat away from Kamala Harris, which is why I'm still perhaps more optimistic than our friend Jim Lee from Susquehanna Polling about Trump's chances in Michigan as well to run the table on battleground states. But I understand.
And when Trump was in Novi, Michigan last weekend, he did have a few Muslim leaders that are supporting him because they said on stage that if he gets into office, they believe that the war would end.
Yeah, like the mayor of Hamtramck, the only Muslim majority town in the country, and others who've stepped forward because they understand Kamala Harris to be the fork-tongued cipher that she is. Interestingly, Obama was on the trail, too, trying to, I guess, make an appeal to Jewish voters. Boy, if you, again, these appeals they have to make to their base, to get their base out, I'd be pretty concerned if this was, I'd be pretty concerned the fact that they have to focus on bringing Jewish voters, perhaps they think they're losing, back into the camp by trotting out the old Trump tropes that Barack Obama did in Wisconsin.
Maybe you're Muslim American or Jewish American, and you are heartbroken and furious about the ongoing bloodshed in the Middle East and worried about the rise of anti-Semitism. Why would you place your faith in somebody who instituted a so-called Muslim ban, who sat down for pleasantries with Holocaust deniers, who said that there were very fine people on both sides of a white supremacist rally?
But then on the flip side, Bill Clinton on the trail for Kamala. I think Bill Clinton may be one of those secret Trump voters like the Biden family, starting with Joe, because recounting this two-state solution that he had forged with Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak back when he was president, I don't think this helps the middling position that Kamala is trying to, and Obama, trying to affect in the closing days and hours of the campaign. I I don't see how this helps, but maybe I'm just not sophisticated enough. Take a listen.
And the only time Yasser Arafat didn't tell me the truth was when he promised me he was going to accept the peace deal that we had worked out, which would have given the Palestinians a state on 96% of the West Bank and 4% of Israel, and they got to choose where the 4% of Israel was. So they would have the effect of the same land of all the West Bank. They would have a capital in East Jerusalem. They would have I can hardly talk about this. And they would have equal access all day, every day, to the security towers that Israel maintained all through the West Bank up to the Golden Heights. All this was offered, including, I will say it again, a capital in East Jerusalem and 2 of the 4 quadrants of the old city of Jerusalem, confirmed by the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and his cabinet. And they said no. And I think part of it is that Hamas did not care about a homeland for the Palestinians. They wanted to kill Israelis and make Israel uninhabitable. Well, I got news for them. They were there first. Before their faith existed, they were there. In the time of King David, and the southernmost tribes had Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, that's true. But again, I don't know how that helps bring MF or Spice, the pro-Hamas congresswoman from Michigan, the Detroit area. That would be Rashida Tlaib. I don't know how that brings her back into the fold. She's refused to endorse Kamala. I don't know how that brings the Muslim American mayor of Hamtramck, Michigan, into the fold. It's very, very strange. I mean, Clinton is right. He's right about Hamas, but he's taking a decidedly pro-Israel position, which is something that Kamala has definitely avoided. Very interesting. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by Stephen Bucci for our weekly conversation. Bucci served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official, visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies as well. Stephen, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's always my pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me back.
The story that Bill Clinton told about how close that he alleges they were to a 2-state solution in Israel. I mean, first of all, I have a problem with some of what he said, like the only time Yasser Arafat ever lied to me. Yasser Arafat was a terrorist and a liar by trade, so I very much doubt that was true. But your reaction to this discrepancy between a couple of former presidents out stumping for Kamala?
Well, Bill Clinton's obviously a little further back in the process. For those of us that remember when Clinton got there and we realized, wow, this guy is really liberal. This is going to change our direction of our country. And now we look back at him and say, man, I wish if we got to have a Democrat, give us somebody like Bill Clinton, because he's actually pretty reasonable compared to Barack Obama and Kamala Harris. But look, Barack Obama's flat lying. Every one of those points in that speech have been completely refuted, not by Trump sources, but by Democrat sources in the past. But he trotted them out all day and does his typical dramatic presentation, and he's lying. Clinton, maybe because he's getting a little old and getting closer to his final time, that he felt compelled to at least be relatively truthful about the attitude of the folks on the other side of the Israeli-Palestinian confrontation. And he told more of the truth. I'm with you. Look, Harris she doesn't even make any sort of effort to blend those two completely opposed viewpoints that she gave as she moves from one state to another. that's shameless. It is horrific that she thinks she can get away with it, and those audiences are going to believe it. Frankly, I think there will be some that will believe it, which is sad. People need to look at what's being said, test it, and, normally that was the job of the press. They call people out on that sort of stuff. But, you guys are doing it. There's some other outlets doing it. But the legacy mainstream press, no way in the world. In fact, they double down on it and put focus on anything former President Trump says that's even a little bit out of line with anything, or they twist what he says to get it out of line. But with Harris, it's just a free pass.
I wanted to get your reaction to H.R. McMaster, General McMaster. He's like all these generals out with a book. And so he sat down with the preternaturally jejune Margaret Hoover on Firing Line, which is, I can barely bring myself to call her program that. It seems like an affront to the late, great William F. Buckley. But anyway, McMaster had this to say about Trump and his disruptive character, and sort of the two sides of it he gave, sort of the disruptive innovator, but the disruptive innovator that sometimes gets in his own way. And I wanted to get your reaction to, you think, as to whether or not you think this is a fair, constructive critique of Trump's geopolitical policymaking.
In the book, I describe, sort of the fragility of his ego, and the need for affirmation. This is not a newsflash to anybody, but one of the ways that people would try to manipulate Donald Trump is they would say, hey, this will make you look weak, or this will alienate your base. And what he really wants is that affirmation. And if there's a threat that could be taken away from him, he had a tendency to kind of disrupt himself. He would oftentimes make really solid decisions that others maybe wouldn't make. I mean, I think, for example, the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, right? That many presidents have said they were going to do that, but nobody ever had. Nobody ever had.
And you think he did that out of reasons for ego?
No, I think he did that because of his disruptive nature and his tendency to question conventional wisdom, which is positive. But oftentimes he would be so disruptive, he would disrupt his own agenda. For example, as you mentioned, burden sharing, right? Everybody can sign up for that. Of course, our allies should shoulder their fair share of the burden on defense. But then to go further and say, well, if you don't pay up, we might not defend you, that delivers kind of a psychological blow to the alliance and emboldens somebody like Vladimir Putin, who would like nothing more than to divide the NATO alliance. So again, it's kind of a story of him, his disruptive nature, and I think all of us would agree, right? Everybody would agree. There's a lot in Washington that needs to be disruptive. But of course, the sad part of the story is that he tends to become the antagonist in his own story.
Stephen?
Look, HR is a brilliant guy. He at least had the sense to acknowledge that Trump's disruptive nature, which there's a bunch of us that think that is a very positive thing. He does things differently. He responds differently to the stimulus that's given him in Washington than any other president we've ever had. And the vast majority of the time, it worked out very well, particularly in a foreign policy area. But he lets his establishment roots pop back in when he talks about the burden sharing argument. Well, yeah, you want to tell people they've got to share the burden, but you don't really want to scare them too much because after all, then they might actually do it.
Yeah, right.
And pay their fair share, which is exactly what Trump did. He's the only president that I know of that got NATO members to up their spending and actually play a positive role. He set the conditions for the response from the Europeans at helping Ukraine that we had, which was in the past, it would have been 100% us. But, because Trump had laid that marker down when they did invade under Biden, because they thought, okay, we got a weak U.S. president, maybe we can pull this off. The Europeans were then ready to at least step forward to a much greater degree than they ever had before. I thought they were going to fold like a house of cards. They didn't. They stood up. That was because of what Trump did during the administration. So HR saying that was a negative thing, I think he's going back to the roots of the establishment of, oh, they're our friends, so we really can't criticize them ever. They criticize us all the time. What's the big deal? If they're doing something badly, it should be called out, not just to slam them, but with the intent of getting them to do it better. And that's kind of what Trump tried to do. So I think this is a typical, I got a book, I want to sell it, so I know what's going to get people's attention, and that's what he went with.
Yeah, I mean, he's not as obnoxious to me as Kelly or Milley and others, but it's a good illustration of why somebody like H.R. McMaster can't be part of a second term, because even the conventional wisdom that everybody agrees with, that he repeats, which is Trump seeks affirmation. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, actually. Not that Margaret Hoover would notice, but he seeks affirmation. Okay, well, whose affirmation was he seeking when he made those remarks in Helsinki that were so widely criticized in the direction of Putin? I criticize them. That's not the way I want the president to speak to Putin or to any other despot. I want the moral clarity that we had from Reagan. So he wasn't appealing to, I'm a Trump supporter, he wasn't appealing to his base there. I mean, he has his own approach to things, and some people may like it and some people may not, but it's not necessarily, it's always, looking for affirmation wherever it is most manifest. He's willing to take criticism from his base. He's willing to take criticism from the usual suspects. He's willing to take criticism from our allies because he has a way of doing things that is just a little bit different. But at the end of the day, is he advancing in his way the best interests of America, national security and economic? And the answer is, generally speaking, yes. And that seems to evade people like H.R. McMaster.
Yeah, I would agree. And, no offense, I worked in Washington for 16 years, in the front office of the Pentagon, then as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, then, with IBM, working directly with the government, and then finally with the Heritage Foundation. And I got to tell you, there are darn few people of any level of office of significance that don't seek affirmation on a pretty darn regular basis.
Yeah, right.
To say that's some sort of, great fault, there's a lot of pots calling that kettle black in that case, including HR, by the way, who, is a very confident, very bright guy. But like most leaders, he wants people to say, man, you're really doing great. That was a brilliant book, General. Yeah, got it. No, that's sort of a bogus, if that's all you got for criticism, that the guy likes people to back him up and tell him that what he did was good, okay, that's not that big a fault in the Washington pantheon, believe me.
Yeah, and then the flip side of that is, what is he supposed to? He's supposed to be a contrarian just to be a contrarian? Well, that doesn't make any sense either. So, yeah, it's just one of those things that becomes a handle and people just mindlessly repeat it and it never really consider it, the implications. Anyway, Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as Army Special Forces officer, top Pentagon official, as he mentioned. Now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks as always.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I hope you have a great week.
You too, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political announcement.
Family, country, community. Ed Soliday has spent his life in service to others. A graduate of Valparaiso High School, Ed Soliday went on to attend Indiana University and served our country in the Army, where he earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. After his military service, Ed Soliday built a successful career as a pilot and flight safety expert, leading crisis management at United Airlines on 9/11. Now, Ed Soliday is serving us at the Indiana State House, where he puts people ahead of partisanship. Representative Ed Soliday is a respected voice working to protect taxpayers, secure our energy grid, and attract better-paying jobs to the region. Ed is endorsed by the Indiana Fraternal Order of Police, the Indiana State Police Alliance, and the Indiana Professional Firefighters PAC. Representative Ed Soliday. Common sense leadership for Northwest Indiana. Vote Ed Soliday for state representative on or before Tuesday, November 5th.
Paid for by friends of Ed Soliday Committee.
Stress, not eating properly, binge watching.